Hey friend, and welcome back. It's great to see you. And today, I'd like to talk about this game, 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. This is a early 2009 release, which was developed by Swordfish Studios. And I don't know much about Swordfish Studios, and I learned why. And it's because when I looked up the company, they had produced a couple rugby games. And they also made a first-person shooter that was on PlayStation 2 called Cold Winter, which is actually a pretty cool game. Maybe I'll talk about it someday on the channel. So anyways, they developed this game. And then who published it? I mean, at the end of the day, THQ published this game. But during the process, Swordfish was acquired by Vivendi, who was then acquired by Sierra Entertainment, who then became Codemasters, and then the studio closed in 2010, and a lot of the developers now, they work at Crytek UK, and throughout that process somewhere THQ got the rights and then they published the game. And so the game is a 2009 sequel to 50 Cent Bulletproof, and it's quite a build-up from the original, and so we'll talk a little bit about that during this video. I guess the first thing I'll do is just show off the game itself. So of course we have 50 Cent here. He is on sand, I would assume, based on the cover of this. Kind of looks like he's in like a Middle Eastern country in the background slightly. He's got a couple grenades on him. We don't see anything too crazy on the back. It's just talking a little bit about this being his world, or I guess his rules, their world. Who is they? That's kind of coded language, isn't it? It says, play as 50 Cent, the world's biggest hip-hop star, in this fast-paced action shooter. You and the G-Unit will battle across 2 countries to collect your payday and exact your revenge on those who've crossed you. Which 2 countries? I don't exactly mention in the game, but we can make some implications, surely. One of the things I wanted to point out is just look at all of the logos. If there's a logo that exists, this game is the stock car of video games. It's just Unreal, Swordfish, Shady Records, Aftermath, G-Unit, Interscope, Violator, GameSpy, PhysX by NVIDIA, THQ, all of the PlayStation logos. It's kind of ridiculous. And then I just went through the slew of publishers who were involved in the acquiring of Swordfish throughout the process. But somehow they made what a lot of people say is a competent game. The game was better received, surely, and was a step up from Bulletproof. And a lot of the critiques kind of revolved around the overall game's story and some of the repetitiveness of the game and its overall nonsense as a story. And the game only went on to sell 50,000 units. Ouch! That kind of hurts, I'm sure. But I digress. Let's pop this guy open, and here again we're going to see repeating art, which I mention often is kind of a little grinds my gears, I guess. And we see all them logos again up on top of the disc there. And here in the manual, let's guess if it's going to be grayscale. I'm thinking grayscale. And as always, we got the grayscale manual. But nothing in particular that's interesting in this manual. Some things on the main menu telling you how to start the game. I do love that there's some little bios in here on the various G-Unit members. So Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo is in the game, and then DJ Woo Kid. So you can choose them as partners throughout each of the missions. And that's about it. There's nothing too crazy in here. I do like some of the advertisements at the back. So we get one for Saints Row 2, which is a fantastic game. And then we also have UFC Undisputed, which I've never played any of these games. And Before I Self-Destruct, I guess this was the studio album coming out around the time that the game released. And then we have something for Red Faction. Gorilla, which I reviewed on this channel, the remastered edition, maybe worth checking out. Okay, so a couple of little background things that I thought were interesting about the title. So the game was originally, at least what the basis of the game was, to be an adaptation of a Covert One novel, which I'm not so familiar with the series, but did learn that this was a series of thriller novels, and Swordfish was developing a game for it. And that's because there was going to be a movie adaptation for Covert 1. Unfortunately, the movie got canceled, and so they had all this work they had done, and they weren't too sure what to do with it. But Vivendi, who they had recently come in contact with, were trying to plan a sequel for Bulletproof. And so Swordfish said, hey, well, we have a concept, and we can probably spruce it up and make it a little more gangsta, so to speak. And so they did exactly that. They retweaked the stuff they were working on for Covert 1, and it became 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. And one of the cool things that was nice about just the development process, I think is always great to hear with some of these more licensed type of games, is that 50 Cent and G-Unit were quite involved with the developers in making the game. They came to the studio multiple times and played the game and provided feedback. There's a really funny line where I guess 50 Cent's son was there and was like, I want helicopters in the game. And so they did exactly that. And you get 2 helicopter bosses and a helicopter mission where you fly around and you shoot to the ground. So it's always nice to see that there is some sort of reciprocation in the process of developing video games, and I think it leads to a better product. And surely, as just a normie consumer of this title, 50 had provided some valuable feedback to the developers to continue to enhance the game and the experience, which is something that reviewers did mention when comparing it to Bulletproof, for example. So anyways, let's talk a little bit about just the overall gameplay and structure of the game. So this is just really a standard third-person cover-based shooter mostly. I mean, this is of the era, 2009. Think about games like how Uncharted plays or Gears of War and so on and so forth, and you're going to get exactly that experience playing 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. There are a few, as I mentioned, vehicle missions as well, where you'll be on the back of a Humvee driving down a road and you're shooting at vehicles and things like that, or maybe in a helicopter and shooting to the ground. But outside of those sections, this is really just your cover-based running and gunning style of shooter game. There are a couple of interesting features that do add into that experience. So one of the first ones is that you can shout out taunts at your enemies while shooting them and killing them and so on and so forth, and this drives an increase in the points you get for your overall performance in a specific mission. There's also another kind of more bullet time, slow-mo feature as well called Gangsta Fire, I think is Gangsta Fire. And you can slow down time and of course take out enemies with time being slowed down, which is pretty nice. So interacting with these features, it increases your points, which increases your bonuses for completing missions where you get cash and so on and so forth. You can also find cash around the world, and then you can use that cash to buy new taunts, new weapons, and so on. And a lot of the most OP weapons are pretty affordable as it is, so if you're not going for a completionist lens on getting these things, then within the first handful of story missions, you will have purchased some of the most powerful weapons, and you'll be running through just annihilating everything in your path. At least that was my experience, and I was playing the game on one of the harder difficulties, if not the hardest, and didn't really find myself having too challenging of a time during that experience. But overall, that's the gameplay loop. It is a pretty fun game from like a mechanics perspective. I did really enjoy that. While it is standard, the gun gameplay feels really tight and functional, and the weapons are punchy, and it's quite gory and destructive. And so I was really kind of happy walking away playing this game that I got the product that I did, so to speak. So yes, the gameplay does get a little bit of repetitive because there isn't too much of an evolution on the gameplay throughout your run. However, I did have still fun with it. There are other ways to spruce the game up as well, in terms of you can play the game in co-op, which is pretty cool. So in every single mission, 50 is accompanied by a member of G-Unit that I mentioned earlier. And if you had someone you're playing online with, they could take on that partner role and kind of help you get through the mission itself, which is pretty cool. Now the trouble is if you don't have that and it's the year 2024 4 right now, and resultingly nobody is playing a 15-year-old now like $60 used 50-cent game on PlayStation 3. You do have to play with the AI, and the AI characters are quite dumb in most instances. There were a couple times throughout my run where they got stuck on a box or just decided they were just going to stand and like not help me get to the next part of the mission. And unfortunately, they are required in certain points to run an animation that kind of helps you get to the next part of the mission. So that was frustrating because I had to restart entire sections in order to kind of continue forward, I guess, so to speak. So that was something that I was facing, but I guess, what are you going to do? That just happens sometimes with playing games. The other thing I did want to mention is that on the PlayStation 3, which is where I played this game, I faced a series of issues with performances. So whether it was lagging controls or, say, frame rate issues because there was just so many particles and destruction and enemies and gunfire on the screen and so on and so forth, it did kind of leave me having some issues from a performance lens. And I'm usually not a person who says, hey, these are problematic or they're giving me too huge of issues when I'm playing the game. But I just did want to mention them because they were so systemic in the overall gameplay experience, and they kind of happened from beginning to end. And I think probably part of that is playing the PlayStation 3 version as opposed to maybe the Xbox 360 version. But what are you going to do? I mean, that was just purely my experience at the end of the day. So to continue some of the other gameplay critiques and things that kind of came up that I noticed, there's a serious amount of auto-aim kind of happening throughout the gameplay experience. I will be aiming at an enemy and it'll snap to another, or it'll snap to their chest when I wanted to aim at their head, and so on and so forth. And I don't remember off the top of my head, I don't think I looked in the options to see if there was a way to change that, and I don't recall seeing a way to change that. And so that kind of was a bit much because I prefer to play with minimal to no auto aim in most game experiences, and so that was quite a troubling kind of overcoming for me when I was playing the game itself. And another big thing that was happening to me was, because this is a cover shooter, you have a button dedicated to taking cover. But the challenge with having a button dedicated to taking cover is when the same button causes you to roll, well, then now you're going to face some issues, because what was happening to me is I'd want to take cover and 50 Cent would be rolling around, or I'd want to roll around and then 50 would be trying to snap to the closest area of cover. And it's not as if the controller was overwhelmed with various buttons. So I think it would have been nice if the developers had kind of 2 dedicated buttons or ways of remapping those controls, because I found that to be more frustrating than not, especially when playing on the harder difficulties. You don't have a lot of health really to manage you through the level, and so you want to best protect that, right? And so that would kind of become challenging when the game was not interacting with you in the way you'd hope. Okay, other big thing that I want to call out is that the UI in this game is, it's too much. It's kind of atrocious. I like the modern era game now, where your player's on the screen and there is nothing else. It's just the world. It's total immersion and atmosphere. And in 50 Cent, it's the complete opposite of that. I feel like I'm playing like a mobile game or like an arcade game. I mean, just some of the things that I wrote down. There is information on your screen at all times for money, points, gangsta fire meter, objectives, challenges, weapons and ammo, health, subtitles. And they're all huge, because I'm playing this on a 4K TV, but this was a game made for 720p, right? So like all the icons on the UI are like huge and just taking up at least 50%, if not 60% of screen real estate. And then of course, behind the UI is you, the character in the world, and just so much going on, shooting and action, and it was just a lot. It was really taking me out of the gaming experience. Not that you need to be totally immersed for this game, but this is something I want to call out. Okay, and then the last piece really is the game is a linear point A to point B style game where you go from start all the way to the end of the campaign. And while linear, and I appreciate that, the game world itself and the design of the world itself is very linear as well. You know, you're not going to be finding off the beaten path areas too frequently. There's going to be some secrets where you find some cache boxes that you can break open and get bonuses. But otherwise, you're going point A to B, and because this was a game made in the late 2000s, that experience is going to be very not so interesting. It's going to be gray, brown, drab. And because this game takes place in the Middle East, you're just going to get that as part of naturally the game's world environment as it is. But anyways, a lot to say about the gameplay. I think in summary, I had issues with the game. I had performance issues. I had some mechanical issues in controlling 50 Cent and in some of the visual information going on. But when we look at the core of just the gunplay, running around, shooting things, having fun, this game is really up there on the fun factor. And I did still have a lot of fun with it in those respects. Now, would I go back and revisit it? And am I going to be thinking like, wow, I really need to play Blood on the Sand again? Probably not. But for the 8 to 10 hours invested in the game, I did have fun, so to speak. So, okay, that's the gameplay. Let's talk about just the ancillary things. So first, the story. So the game is set somewhere in the Middle East, and G-Unit is having a concert, and the promoter, is of course supposed to pay G-Unit after the concert, and he says, well, I don't have the money, but I do have this diamond-encrusted human skull. And 50's like, all right, yeah, why not? We'll take that for payment. That's fine. And so while they're leaving the venue, 50 and G-Unit, they're attacked by a paramilitary organization led by this guy, Saeed. And their objective is, of course, to get their hands on the crystal skull, and they steal it. And from there, 50's journey through these Middle Eastern cities and outback or whatever, they're just on a mission to get the crystal skull. And so I just saying the story out loud just sounds so ridiculous, and I think the story is ridiculous. And so let's set that aside. Let's just set aside the ridiculous nature of the story. When I look at the story and the writing and the structure, aside from it being ridiculous in that little core piece, it's not particularly interesting. I mean, from there, it just follows story beats of 50 goes to this place, and then he goes talk to this guy who says, oh, you got to go there to find Saeed, and then you show up, and Saeed's not there, but maybe Saeed's second hand is there, and oh, you fight them in a big boss battle, and then now you have to go and, so on and so forth. And it could have been any object in the world, and just what makes it ridiculous is 50 Cent is in the Middle East for some reason trying to get this crystal skull. And especially having some context on the background of this was supposed to be the basis for a adaptation of a thriller novel series. I guess I can see now why it was what it was. But all in all, the story is also what attracted me to first wanting to play this game because of how ridiculous it sounded. So there is a little bit of a 50-50 there. Overall, the story was boring. I did not pay attention to it not particularly well because it was just not drawing me in. Okay, let's talk about some of the sound aspects of this game. So the soundtrack is all 50 Cent G-Unit music, and honestly, the soundtrack slaps. And it's a great part of enjoying a game like this because the music really adds to that run and gun, cover shooter. Oh, I'm shooting over the wall, I'm jumping, I'm hurling insults and throwing grenades at people. It all pairs very well, folks. And the game has a built-in music player so you can enjoy that music in the moment however you kind of want to, as long as you boot up the game. There is also a way of doing playlist management because you will unlock songs throughout the course of the game. But one of the things I found tricky is if I remember my experience right, it was hard to manage that playlist. Like you couldn't go in and say, I don't want to hear that song, I want this song to play first, or so on and so forth. What oftentimes I found was happening is when you started a new mission or you restarted a checkpoint, you would often find yourself hearing the first couple songs because those are the first couple songs in the track listing, and the track listing appeared to play in order. Maybe there were ways to change that I'm not recalling as well, but that was my experience, and Ideally, if I was wrong, I'd hope someone would tell me otherwise, but that did kind of hamper just enjoying the birth of music that was present in the game. The voice acting, I would say, is not particularly special, and I didn't find that the celebrity voices really seemed realistic or sounded like the celebrities they were emulating. However, the sound effects, again, to pair with the music and the awesome gameplay that's on presentation here, were great themselves. I mean, enemies screaming and running around, explosions, gunfire, it was all very effective and made for an enjoyable just experience. So again, going back to the gameplay, I think that does keep to making the game super fun and that ridiculousness enjoyable because of the exact premise that's happening at the time. And I kind of touched on the art design and world design a bit already, but graphically I'll say on the PlayStation 3 that the game, it looks like a PlayStation 3 game. It really does. And I'll say that I don't think the slew of them have aged particularly well, because at the time, a realistic, gray, drab worlds, environments were kind of the catch-all, and that is represented here in Blood on the Sand. Pair that with it being set in a Middle Eastern country in the 2000s, I think they didn't really get too adventurous with the visual style of the game, and so it falls right into that similar mainstream kind of look of the time. And I did find graphically the game to be hit or miss. I don't even think the characters particularly look like their real-life counterparts, and so take what you want from that. Graphically, the game didn't necessarily impress me. So overall, I had fun playing 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. Here's a little summary of my thoughts. Again, gameplay was a little bit of a mixed bag, had some performance issues, not a big fan of the UI. Did really enjoy the gunplay and some of the options on hand to kind of take apart that gunplay and enjoy it. The story, ridiculous, but at the same time, just not very interesting as long as you take out those ridiculous aspects and just look at the core of what is developing over the course of the game. The music was great. The sound effects were great. The voice acting didn't really sell me too particularly well, especially for the celebrity emulated voices. And graphically, the game was not anything too particularly special. I think one of the things I find most interesting about 50 Cent Blood on the Sand is that it has a staying power. It's a game that when people go and they play today, they say, hey, this is still really quite fun. And I would agree with them. And I was happy that I got the opportunity to play the game and have it here in my collection, especially now that the game is just kind of going up in price. I think it's $60 last time I checked, around end of 2024 here. And I am a bit surprised to see that, but I guess knowing that the game only sold 50,000 units in the US, less surprised. It must have been a pretty low print game overall if that was the case. And when, you know, eBay buyers as sellers, they start picking up on these things, usually those copies do start to run a good penny. So all right, anyway, have you played 50 Cent Blood on the Sand or Bulletproof? Did you like them? Did you prefer one or over the other? We'll be interested to know what you have to say. Well, until next time, really appreciate you tuning in. Take care, be healthy, and I'll see you next weekend.